Every tarnished was thrown away once before being called back to the lands between. That second summons was not mercy, it was Queen Marika using the discarded to finish something she started when she let her own son die, inside a system she no longer believed in. What she was really rebuilding and why she needed outsiders instead of her own people to do it, still does not add up. The Tarnished. The word itself is an insult. Not a title, not an honor, an insult, and the game hands it to you in the first 30 seconds like it's doing you a favor. You are not a hero. You are trash that got picked back up because someone needed trash for a very specific job. Strip away the marketing and look at what the Tarnished actually are. Exiles. People who once carried grace, lost it, got kicked out of the lands between entirely, and lived long enough elsewhere to rot in obscurity. Zero glory, zero destiny. Just exile, full stop. Then one day, without warning, without consent, grace comes back on. You're summoned home to a land that never wanted you the first time it threw you out. And who's ringing that bell? All roads point back to Queen Marika the Eternal. The shattering already happened by the time you show up. The Elden Ring is already broken. Marika is already gone from the throne. The Tarnished aren't arriving to prevent a catastrophe, they're arriving after one. Which means every Tarnished pulled back into the lands between is walking straight into the aftermath of a decision a queen made about her own crown, her own order, her own dead son. You're not the protagonist of that story. You're cleanup. The Round Table Hold hammers this home. Nobody there treats you like royalty. You're one of dozens, maybe hundreds, all summoned the exact same way, all disposable if you fail. The game never once frames you as uniquely chosen, it frames you as convenient. The pattern is too consistent to be an accident. Discarded, then recalled, then pointed at a throne like a loaded weapon someone else is holding. But if someone is steering you, you have to ask who is doing the actual talking, because the voice giving you your destiny isn't the one you think it is, and it may not even be working properly anymore. 2 fingers. A giant pink hand sits on a throne and speaks for God, except half the time, nobody can tell what it's actually saying. That's the 2 fingers. The supposed direct line to the greater will, and the first problem is obvious the moment you meet them. They are massive, fleshy, vaguely obscene-looking things enthroned in the Round Table Hold, and they communicate through finger readers like Enya, who translate their will into something the Tarnished can act on. Enya herself admits the message does not always come through clean. She talks about interpreting gestures, filling gaps, making guesses. That is not a chain of command. That is a game of telephone played with a corpse's hand. Their job, at least on paper, is enormous. The 2 fingers are the ones who select the Tarnished, legitimize a champion, and steer the entire lands between toward a new Elden Lord. Every grace you follow, every guidance pointing you toward greatness, traces back to their authority. Except the actual instructions are cryptic, delayed, sometimes contradictory, and finger readers have been known to misjudge or mislead the very Tarnished they're supposed to be guiding. People immediately connect them to the 3 fingers, the chaos-aligned hand hiding beneath the Round Table Hold, and assume it's one big finger family. It isn't. The 3 fingers openly oppose the Golden Order. The 2 fingers claim to enforce it. Same anatomy, opposite allegiance, zero coordination. Nothing in canon confirms this outright, but follow the pattern. A line of communication this fragmented, this delayed, this dependent on human guesswork looks less like a god speaking clearly and more like a signal that lost its source a long time ago. The 2 fingers keep issuing orders with the confidence of something still connected upstairs. The static says otherwise, which circles back to something worse than a broken hand on a throne. A queen once trusted this exact same order enough to raise a son inside it, and it killed him anyway. And if the messengers might be broken, that raises a worse question about the thing they claim to speak for, the structure they're supposed to be legitimizing rulers on behalf of, because most people don't even know what that thing actually is. The Elden Ring. Everyone in the lands between is killing each other over a piece of jewelry that does not exist. That is the joke buried at the center of this entire war. Kings, queens, demigods, an entire tarnished army marching across a broken continent, all fighting over something called a ring, and not one of them is looking for something you could slide onto a finger. The Elden Ring is not an object. It never was. It is the operating system the whole world runs on, and somebody pulled the plug. Strip away the mythology and the ring is a set of laws. Its runes are not decorations. They are code, the fundamental rules that decide what order looks like, how death functions, whether rebirth is even possible. The Elden Beast exists to enforce those rules, acting as the living interface for the greater will's authority over reality itself. That is not flavor text. That is the mechanism. So when the Golden Order stood unshaken for centuries, it was not because peace had been achieved, it was because the system was still running. The rules were intact. Everyone downstream of the ring, every rune, every law, every demigod's claim to power only worked because the code compiled. Then the shattering happened, and the operating system crashed mid-execution. This is where it stops being abstract. A woman built to be the perfect vessel for that order watched it chew through her own son and decided the code itself was rotten. Not a rule to bend, a structure to burn. When Marika broke the ring, she was not committing vandalism against a divine artifact. She was deleting the framework that told an entire world what was real, what was permitted, what counted as alive or dead or neither. Every faction you meet, every ending you choose, is really an argument about what gets installed next. Restore the old code, rewrite it, replace it with something that has never existed before. Fans still fight over whether the ring is a literal cosmic law, a divine machine, or just a symbol for something bigger, and honestly the game never fully picks a side. But the function is never in doubt. This was never a treasure hunt, it was a fight over root access to existence, and once the laws stopped holding, someone had to be the first thing to fall through the cracks. The way that first death unraveled did not just break a rule. It exposed exactly how far the rot already went. Godwyn the Golden. There is a demigod in Elden Ring who died and it did not help. Everyone else who dies stays dead, or at least dies in a way that means something. Godwyn the Golden got murdered on the night of the Black Knives, and the killing only did half its job. The obvious story is simple. A blade killed a golden prince. The actual story is that the blade only managed to kill one half of him. Ranni's dagger, wielded through Black Knife ringleader, cut Godwyn's soul clean out of his body. Destined death, the one force in the lands between that could actually make a demigod stay dead, got stolen and used as the weapon. It worked exactly as intended on the soul. It did nothing to the body. So the soul died, the body kept going. What was left did not rot and did not heal. It became the first root of those who live in death, a spreading rot that runs underneath the Erd tree itself. A golden tree fed by golden corruption from the inside. Every skeleton that reassembles itself after you kill it, every deathbird, every unkillable horror wearing rotted flesh in this game, traces back to this one body that forgot how to finish dying. That is not a metaphor. That is documented cause and effect, root to source. Marika built a perfect order and told everyone death itself answered to the Erd tree. Then her own son got cut apart by the very rules she designed to make death optional for gods. And instead of ending him, it built a second, worse kind of existence underneath her golden tree. The order didn't break from outside. It broke by eating its own child. Nobody knows for certain what is still in there. The body moves. The body has no soul. Whether anything resembling Godwyn is still making choices in that half-corpse, or whether it is just meat animated by leftover godhood, stays unanswered even for the people who studied this the hardest. Follow the pattern of every other root-bound horror in this game, though, and none of them show a single flicker of the person they used to be. A rule that was supposed to make death sacred got broken in half, and the wound never closed. It just kept spreading, quiet and patient, waiting to ruin something that still had a chance to end well. Miquella's consort. Miquella never wanted a husband, he wanted a co-signer. Every fan theory about his consort treats this like a love story waiting to be solved. It is not a love story. It is a succession plan with a ring attached. Start with what is actually confirmed. Miquella the Unalloyed carried a vow, an abandoned promise tied to a future partner who would stand beside him in whatever came after the Erd tree. Shadow of the Erd tree spends real weight on his planned ascension, and that ascension keeps circling back to one detail. He needed someone at his side to make it legitimate, not to make it romantic, to make it official. Then Mog happens. Mog, Lord of Blood, kidnaps Miquella in the base game, drags him into the Mogwyn dynasty, and tries to force him into the role of consort through blood and ritual. Players assumed that was the answer. It was not. Mog forcing the position only proves how badly other demigods wanted that seat filled and how much power apparently came with sitting in it. This is where the community actually splits, and splits hard. Some point to Radahn, citing the tenderness between them and the ending built entirely around raising him from the dead to stand beside Miquella in the Land of Shadow. Others point back further to Godwyn, the Golden Brother, the first casualty of the story, whose death started the entire rot the Erd tree tried to hide. Neither claim closes the case. The game hands you fragments, not a name. What ties it together is Miquella's method. This is a demigod tied to Saint Trina, to dreamless sleep, to the Haligtree, to an entire splinter religion he built quietly while everyone else was busy warring over the capital. He was not looking for love. He was assembling a throne with 2 seats, and he needed a body to fill the second one before anyone noticed what he was actually building underneath the charm. That is the part that should bother you more than any kidnapping plot. The gentlest child of the golden lineage, the one everyone trusted, was running his own succession scheme the entire time, just quieter and prettier than his siblings' wars. But building a new order is at least an act of creation, and there is a force loose in this world that doesn't want to rule anything. It just wants to burn the entire board until nothing can be built on it again. Frenzied flame. Every faction in the lands between wants to sit on the throne. This one wants to burn the throne, the room, and the building down to a crater. That is not an exaggeration. It is the literal outcome of one of the game's own endings. The Frenzied Flame does not scheme for a better order. It does not negotiate, reform, or replace anything. It spreads as pure chaos, erasing the lines between people, gods, and matter itself until nothing is left standing to argue over. Every other power you have met wants to build something on the wreckage. This one just wants wreckage. Its influence runs through the 3 fingers, buried beneath the subterranean shunning grounds under Lendl like a secret nobody wants to look at directly. Remember the 2 fingers, the shriveled hand puppeting the Golden Order from behind a curtain, feeding the same recycled champions into the same broken game? The 3 fingers are what happens when that influence stops caring about the game entirely. Touch them and you do not get a purpose. You get consumed, remade into something that only wants to keep consuming. Choose the Lord of Frenzied Flame ending, and you watch the entire structure of the world catch fire, not metaphorically, but as the actual final image the game leaves you with. Every rule, every hierarchy, every distinction between order and chaos turns to ash at once. Nobody loses more to that kind of thinking than the mother who once believed a perfect eternal system was worth raising a family inside, right up until the system devoured her son and she started wondering if devouring itself was the only honest answer left. Where the flame actually came from stays genuinely unresolved. Nothing in the game states it outright, but follow the pattern anyway. It reads, less like a weapon someone built and more like a principle that always sat outside the divine order, unclaimed, maybe even rejected by the hierarchy that feared it. That is what makes it different. Not corrupted ambition dressed up as virtue, but the one voice in the lands between that looks at the whole rigged system and decides the correct response is not to fix it, but to make sure nothing like it ever exists again. But wanting to burn the world down is one thing when you're an outside force clawing to get in. It is something far more damning when the one god the whole system trusted to hold it together was the one who actually broke it. Marika's shattering. The most powerful being in the lands between looked at the order she was crowned to protect and decided the correct response was to smash it in half with her own hands. That is not rebellion from an outsider. That is the god of the Golden Order becoming her own heretic. Everyone treats the shattering like an event, a crack in a ring, a war that started on a specific day. It is actually a verdict. Godwyn the Golden, her son, dies at the base of the Erd Tree, and instead of dying properly, he rots into an Empyrean stuck halfway into undeath, forever. The system Marika built her entire existence around, the one that promised order and eternity and meaning, let that happen to her own child. So she took a blade to the Elden Ring itself, and every rule underneath it went with it. The game never gives you a cutscene of Marika explaining herself. You get fragments, item descriptions, secondhand dialogue, the shape of what she left behind. That absence is not a writing gap, it is the point. A goddess who spent centuries as the face of absolute order does not narrate her own defection. She just acts and lets the wreckage speak. Nothing in canon states her exact reasoning outright, but follow the pattern. Grief alone does not explain someone dismantling the metaphysical structure of reality. Betrayal alone does not either. What fits is a woman who had already started doubting the order long before Godwyn died and used his death as the final proof she needed to stop pretending it worked. Think about what that actually means. The being everyone else in this story is still fighting to restore, to fix, to inherit, already looked at it from the inside and condemned it. Every demigod slaughtering their way across the map is squabbling over a system its own architect rejected. That is worse than an enemy trying to burn the world down. That is the world's own god agreeing with the arsonist. But a god doesn't strike from inside the crown alone. Someone has to hold the actual knife, and the killers who did it left fingerprints on a conspiracy far larger than a single grieving mother's rage. Black Knife Assassins. One night in Elden Ring's history did not just kill a demigod, it broke the rules. Death itself was supposed to follow, and the people who did it walked away clean. That is not a normal assassination. Normal assassinations end lives. This one ended a law of nature. The Night of the Black Knives looks simple on the surface. A group of hooded killers infiltrate the capital and murder Godwin the Golden in his sleep. Zero warning, zero survivors to explain it, just a corpse that should not exist the way it does. But the weapon is the part that should bother you more than the murder. Their blades carried stolen power tied directly to destined death itself, the same force that later keeps Godwin's body breathing while his soul is already gone. That is not an assassin's tool. That is a metaphysical crowbar, and somebody handed it to them, so who hands out a weapon like that? Not a street gang, not a rogue cult operating in the woods outside the capital. Item lore ties the Black Knife Assassins to Newman origins, the same bloodline threaded through Queen Marika's own rise to power. These are not outsiders storming the gates. These are hands that already had access, moving through a system built to keep people like them out and somehow walking through it anyway. Nothing in canon states outright that Marika's own circle ordered the hit, but follow the pattern. The knives connect to death itself. The bloodline connects to Marika. The victim was her son. That is 3 threads pointing at the same doorway, and every one of them starts inside the crown, not outside it. This was not a rebellion knocking down the gate. It was the gate deciding who got to walk through. We already know Marika chose to let the order rot from the throne down. Now the question is whether she built the knife too, or just looked away while somebody in her own house sharpened it. Their leadership was never named. Their loyalties were never confirmed. All anyone knows for certain is that a faction with roots inside the palace walked in, broke reality's grip on one man's death, and vanished into the same silence that swallowed everyone who might have explained why. If the people closest to the throne were the ones holding the knives, then you have to wonder about the one place that's supposed to be the safe headquarters for everyone trying to fix the world, because a sanctuary run by insiders is only ever as safe as their secrets. Round Table Hold. You have spent this entire video looking for the traitors, and the whole time you have been eating dinner with them. That is not an exaggeration. The Round Table Hold is where you rest, level up, and get handed quest after quest, and it is also where Sir Gideon Avnir, the all-knowing, sits reading books, while quietly steering you toward outcomes he never fully explains. He calls himself an ally. He is also the same kind of insider this video just spent an entire section proving cannot be trusted near a throne. On the surface, the Hold is just a headquarters. Cozy fire, friendly blacksmith, a few familiar faces waiting to hand you your next objective. Every open world game needs a home base, and this one gives you a warm stone room full of people who seem to like you, except the room itself does not behave like a room. You cannot find the Round Table Hold on the overworld map. It does not sit inside Lindell or the Altus Plateau or anywhere else you can walk to on foot. You only ever arrive through sites of grace, teleporting in like the building exists slightly outside the world it claims to belong to. Enya, blind and unmoving, guides your fate from a chair in a hall that has no clear coordinates. Gideon reads scrolls about lands he has apparently never physically visited, and when the story turns, the Hold itself burns, changes, empties out its cast, as if the space was only ever borrowed and the lease just ran out. Nothing in the game states outright what the Hold actually is, so take this as a read rather than a confirmed answer. Follow the pattern anyway. A space with no fixed location, no ordinary architecture, and a population of the exact insiders already implicated in the throne's rot starts to look less like a fortress and more like a held breath. A pocket of order that only exists because it is sealed off from the collapse happening everywhere else. That is the quiet horror of it. The one place that felt safe was never part of the wreckage in the first place. It was removed from it. And somewhere in that arrangement is the same shape as a mother who once sat above a perfect eternal system and realized the only way to protect anything was to wall it off from the very order she built. But if even the safest room in the world is just a scrap of order floating over a collapse, then the real question isn't where the surviving order is hiding, it's where the truth about how it all began was buried, and there's an entire realm that exists only to keep that answer out of sight. Land of Shadow. There is a version of Queen Marika that the Golden Order never let you meet. She is not the fractured goddess bleeding gold from a broken crown. She is the one who existed before any of that was necessary, and the game hit her so well, it took an entire expansion just to prove she was missing. That is the real function of the Land of Shadow. Not a new map, a confession chamber. The realm sits outside the lands between geographically, but the separation runs deeper than distance. It is soaked in the origin of the Golden Order itself, back before the mythology calcified into the version everyone in the main game inherited and never questioned. Miquella sealed it away, wrapped it in Miyazaki brand plot armor, and the community has spent months arguing whether that seal was physical, spiritual, or something closer to erasing a memory nobody was allowed to keep. Nothing in the game states the mechanism outright, but look at what the realm actually contains once you're standing in it. Not new enemies, not a new god to kill for the ending count, Marika's history, the parts that got sanded down into scripture by the time the Erd Tree was casting shade over the lands between. The order everyone bled and died defending across every prior mystery in this video was already standing on a lie by the time anyone swore fealty to it. That is not a small correction. That reframes the entire war. Every splintered faction, every demigod clawing for the throne, every soldier at the round table holding a patched-up order together with borrowed titles, they were all fighting over a structure whose own architect had already walked away from believing in it. The shattering did not create the crack. It revealed one that was load-bearing from day one. The pattern is strong enough to say plainly, the Land of Shadow was not sealed to protect the lands between from some outside threat. It was sealed to protect the myth from its own maker. A god who builds a perfect order and then buries the evidence that she stopped believing in it is not hiding an enemy. She is hiding a verdict. So when you go back through everything this order supposedly stood for, the missing king, the exiled outcasts, the corpse-worn crowns nobody would relinquish, none of it was ever really about restoring balance. It was grief wearing the shape of law, built by a woman who watched the system devour her own child and decided the kindest thing she could do was stop pretending it deserved to survive. The shattering was never the moment the world broke. It was the moment she finally stopped hiding that it never was one piece. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.